Welcome to the second part of Chapter 3 of The Call of the Wild, the dominant primordial beast. In the days that followed, as Dawson grew closer and closer, Buck still continued to interfere between Spitz and the culprits, but he did it craftily. When Francois was not around, with the covert of mutiny of Buck, a general feeling sprang up and increased. Dave and Sulquist were affected, but the rest of the team went from bad to worse. Things no longer went right. There was continual bickering and juggling. Trouble was always afoot, and at the bottom of it was Buck. He kept Francois busy, for the dog driver was in constant apprehension of the life and death struggle between the two, which he knew must take place sooner or later. And on more than one night, the sounds of quarreling and strife among the other dogs turned him out of his sleeping robe, fearful that Buck and Spitz were at it. But the opportunity did not present itself, and they pulled into Dawson one dreary afternoon with a great fight still to come. Here were many men and countless dogs, and Buck found them all at work. It seemed the ordinary order of things that dogs should work. All day they swung up and down the main street in long teams, and in the night their jingling bells still went by. They hauled cabin logs and firewood, freighted up the mines, and did all the manner of work that horses did in the Santa Clara Valley. Here and there, Buck met Southland dogs, but in the main they were the wolf-like husky breed. Every night regularly, at 9, at 12, at 3, they lifted a nocturnal song, a weird and eerie chant, in which it was Buck's delight to join. With the aurora borealis foaming coldly overhead, or stars leaping in the frost dance, and the land numb and frozen under its pall of snow, this song of huskies might have been the defense of life, only it was pitched in minor key, with long-drawn wailings and half-sobs, and was more of the pleading of life than in the late trivial of existence. It was an old song, old as the breed itself, one of the first songs of the younger world in a day when songs were sad. It was invested with woe and unnumbered generations, the span by which Buck was so strangely stirred. When he moaned and sobbed, it was within the pain of living, that was of old pain of his wild fathers, and the fear and mystery of the cold and the dark, that was to them fear and mystery, and that he should be stirred by its marked through the ages of fire, or by its marked completeness, with which he harked back through the ages of fire and roof, to the raw beginnings of life in the howling ages. 7 days from the time they pulled into Dawson, they dropped down the steep bank by the barracks to the Yukon Trail and pulled for Diane Saltwater. Burrows was carrying dispatches of anything more urgent than those he had brought in. Also, the travel pride and gripped him, and he purposed to make a record trip of the year. Several things favored him in this. The week's rest had recaptured the dogs and put them in through the trim. The trail they had broken into the country was packed hard by later journeyers, and further, the police had arranged in 2 or 3 places deposits of grub for dog and man, and he was traveling light. They made 60 miles, which is a 50-mile run, on the first day, and the second day saw them booming into Yukon well on their way to Pelly. But such splendid running was achieved not without great trouble on the part of Francois. The insidious revolt, led by Buck, had destroyed the solidarity of the team. It no longer was one dog leaping into the traces. The encouragement Buck gave the rebels left into all kinds of petty misdemeanors. No more was Spitz a leader, greatly to be feared. The old awe departed, and they grew equal to challenging his authority. robbed him of half a fish one night and gulped it down under the protection of Buck. Another night, Deb and Joe fought Spitz and made him forego the punishment they deserved. And even Billy, the good-natured, was less good-natured and whined, not half so pleasantly as in former days. Buck never came near Spitz without snarling and bristling. In fact, his conduct approached that of a bully, and he was given to the swaggering up and down before Spitz's very nose. The breaking down of discipline likewise affected the dogs in their relations with one another. They quarreled, bickered more than ever among themselves, till at times the camp was a howling bedlam. Dave and Sulklace were alone, unaltered, though they were made irritable by the squabbling. Francois swore strange oaths and stamped the snow in a futile rage and tore his hair. His lash was always singing among the dogs, but it was of small avail. Directly his back was turned, and they were at it again. He backed up Spitz with his whip, while Buck backed to the remainder of the team. Francois knew he was behind all the trouble, and Buck knew he knew, but Buck was too clever ever again to be caught red-handed. He worked faithfully in the harness, for the toil had become a delight to him. Yet it was a greater delight slyly to participate in a fight amongst his mates and tangle the traces. At the mouth of the Tahina one night after supper, Dub turned up a shoe rabbit, blundered it and missed. In a second, the whole team was in full cry. 100 yards away was the camp of the Northwest Police, with 50 dogs, huskies all, who joined the chase. The rabbit sped down the river, turned off into a small creek, up the frozen bed of which held steadily. It ran lightly into the surface of the snow, while the dogs plowed through by main strength. Buck led the pack, 60 strong, round the bend after the bend, but he could not gain. He lay down low to the race, whining eagerly, his splendid body flashing forward, leap by leap, in the wan of white moonlight, and leap by leap, like some pale frost wrath, with the snowshoe rabbit flashed on ahead. All that stirring of old instincts, which at stated periods drives men out from the sounding cities to the forest and plain to kill all things by chemically propelled, laden pellets, the bloodlust, the joy to kill, all this was Buck's, only it was infinitely more intimate. He was ranging at the head of the pack, running the wild thing down, the living meat, to kill with his own teeth and wash his muscle in the eyes of warm blood. There is an ecstasy that marks the summit of life, and beyond which life cannot rise. And such is the paradox of living. This ecstasy comes out when one is most alive, and it comes as complete forgetfulness that one is alive. This ecstasy, this forgetfulness of living, comes to the artist, caught up and out of himself in a sheet of flame. It comes to the soldier, war-mad on a stricken field and refusing quarter, and it came to Buck, leading the pack, sounding the old wolf cry, straining after the flood that was alive and that fled swiftly before him through the moonlight. He was sounding the deeps of his nature and the parts of his nature that were deeper than he, going back into the womb of time. He was mastered by the sheer surging of life, the tidal wave of being, the perfect joy of each separate muscle, joint, sinew, and that was everything. That was not death, that it was aglow and rampant, expressing itself in movement, flying exultantly under the stars and over the face of dead matter that did not move. But Spitz, cold and calculating, even in his supreme moods, left the pack and cut across a narrow neck of the land where the creek made a long bend around. Buck did not know of this, and he rounded the bend, the frost wrath of a rabbit still fitting before him. He saw another larger frost wrath leap from the overhanging bank to the immediate path of the rabbit. It was Spitz. The rabbit could not turn, and its white teeth broke back in midair, and it shrilled as loudly as a stricken man may shriek. At sound of this, the cry of life plunging down from life's apex into the grip of death. The full pack of Buck's heels raised a hell's chorus of delight. Buck did not cry out. He did not check himself, but he drove upon Spitz shoulder to shoulder, so hard that he missed the throat. They were rolled over and over in the powdery snow. Spitz gained his feet almost as though he had not been overthrown, smashing Buck down the shoulder and leaping clear. Twice his teeth clipped together, like the steel jaws of a trap, as he backed away for better footing with lean and lifting lips that writhed and snarled. In a flash, Buck knew it. The time had come. It was to the death. As they circled about and snarling ears laid back, keenly watchful for the advantage, the scene had come to Buck with a sense of familiarity. He seemed to remember it all, the white woods and the earth, the moonlight, the thrill of battle. Over the whiteness and silence brooded a ghostly calm. There was not the faintest whisper of air. Nothing moved. Not a leaf quivered. The visible breaths of the dogs raising slowly and lingering in the frosty air. They had made short work of the snowshoe rabbit. These dogs that were ill-tamed wolves, and they were now drawn up in an expectant circle. They too were silent, their eyes only gleaming and their breaths drifting slowly upward. To Buck, it was nothing new or strange. This scene of old time, it was as though it had always been. The wonted way of things. Spitz was a practiced fighter. From Spitsbergen through the Arctic and across Canada and the Barrens, he held his own with all manner of dogs and achieved to mastery over them. Bitter rage was his, but never blind rage. In passion to rend and destroy, he never forgot that his enemy was in like passion to rend and destroy. He never rushed until he was prepared to receive a rush, never attacked until he had first defended that attack. In vain, Buck strove to sink his teeth into the neck of the big white dog. Wherever his fangs struck for the softer flesh, they were countered by the fangs of Spitz. Fang clashed fang, and lips were cut and bleeding, but Buck could not penetrate his enemy's guard. Then he warmed up and enveloped Spitz in a whirlwind of rushes. Time and time again, he tried for the snow-white throat, where life bubbled near to the surface, and each time and every time Spitz slashed him and got away. Then Buck took into rushing as though through the throat, when suddenly drawing back his head and curving in from the side, he would drive his shoulder at the shoulder of Spitz as a ram by which to overthrow him. But instead, Buck's shoulder was slashed down each time as Spitz leaped lightly away. Spitz was untouched while Buck was streaming with blood and panting hard. The fight was growing desperate, and all the while the silent and wolfish cycle waited to finish off whatever dog went down. As Buck grew winded, Spitz took into rushing, and he kept him staggering for footing. Once Buck went over, and the whole circle of 60 dogs started up, but he recovered himself almost in midair, and the circle sank down again and waited. But Buck possessed a quality that made for greatness, imagination. He fought by instinct, but he could fight by head as well. He rushed as though attempting the old shoulder trick, but at the last instinct, swept low in the snow and in. His teeth closed on Spitz's left foreleg. There was a crunch of breaking bone, and the white dog faced him on 3 legs. Thrice he tried to knock him over, then repeated the trick and broke the right foreleg. Despite the pain and helplessness, Spitz struggled madly to keep up. He saw the silent circle with gleaming eyes, lolling tongues, and silvery breasts. drifting upward, closing in on him as he had seen similar circles close in upon beaten antagonists in the past. Only this time, he was the one who was beaten. There was no hope for him. Buck was intolerable. Mercy was a thing reserved for gentler climbs. He maneuvers for the final rush. The circle had tightened till he could feel the breasts of the huskies on his flanks. He could see them beyond Spitz, and to either side, half crouching for the spring, their eyes fixed upon him. A pause seemed to fall. Every animal was motionless, as though turned to stone. Only Spitz quivered and bristled as he staggered back and forth, snarling with horrible menace, as though to frighten off impending death. Then Buck sprang in and out, but while he was in, shoulder had at last squarely met shoulder. The dark circle became a dot on the moon-flowed snow as Spitz disappeared from view. Buck stood and looked on. The successful champion, the dominant, premortal beast who had made his kill and found it good. That's the end of this chapter. The question for this chapter is, how do Buck and Spitz behave differently during the rabbit chase? And what does this difference show? Again, how do Buck and Spitz behave differently during the rabbit chase? And what does this difference show? Thanks.